I will personally send you £50 if you haven't heard of Excel. It is arguably the most popular and the most used tool in companies around the globe, regardless of what domain they are in, because it is one of those tools that you cannot miss. Data is still housed in Excel very, very frequently, and we pretty much use it on a daily basis. It is one of the first tools that I teach my students in the 90-day data domination roadmap. In my last video, I broke down the details of what you need to learn in it, but in this video specifically, I'm only going to focus on what you need to know in Excel. There is good news. You don't need to learn absolutely everything in Excel. You need to know what's specific to you and your job as a data analyst. And a lot of the learning that you do will also come post when you get a job. So for now, I'm going to focus on two things. I'm going to focus on what you can and can't do inside of Excel. And then we're going to dive into a project that's very specific to the kind of things that we do on a day-to-day basis. This tutorial is one of many tutorials inside and projects inside of my mentorship. And if you wanted more details in enrolling in our mentorship, which we help students land a data job within 90 days, then go ahead and click the link in my description or my bio. Both are going to be available. I'll attach absolutely everything that I am using in the description below so that you can follow along with me. But now let's get into the video.
Hello everyone and welcome to Excel Fundamentals. We're going to be diving into Excel as a theory, and next lesson we'll be looking at more the practical aspects. But today we're going to be exploring what is Excel and what it isn't. So Excel is a logic engine, and by that we mean it's a flexible grid designed to process mathematical and logical relationships between cells. And it's important to note that this is between cells because then we'll also explore what it isn't, and that is relationship between tables. But essentially, it's a prototyping tool and it helps businesses understand logic before moving them into robust systems or transporting them into data visualization tools, etc. So it's really just a playground for testing what if logic. What Excel isn't is it's not a database. So Excel lacks the relational integrity and scrutiny and also multi-user capabilities of a true database. So what that means essentially is we can't, with full flexibility, make relationships between tables. A secure vault. Excel is not a secure vault. It passwords and hidden sheets can be easily bypassed, so it's not meant for sensitive high security data. We want to avoid leaking information in our business or in our role as much as possible and abiding by GDPR. So essentially, Excel is not the best tool for keeping data safe. You will also find it's not a multi-user platform. So if you have a file and you share it with multiple people and they access it at the same time, you will find that there will be timeouts, there will be errors, there'll be lags, there'll be essentially where your Excel restarts again because it's fundamentally designed for a single user file manipulation. It's a quite an old tool, but it's so useful for businesses that they still use it today. Interface anatomy. So there's three things I want you guys to write down, which is the one we use the most, which is the ribbon. This is the primary command center organizing our tabs. So we have the ones at home, insert, and data, and these are just to quickly access our tools. The formula bar is the brain of our cell. It displays the underlying logic or value of the active cell. So this is where we actually write our formula. The last one is the status bar, and it's located at the bottom. It provides instant summary tool calculations. Essentially, you'll find it on the right hand side usually, and it will show you things like the sum, the range count, for selected ranges. The grid system is a bunch of columns, rows, and cells, and we'll go into slightly what these all mean. But columns are vertical and they're identified by letters. and you'll find them at the top essentially of your worksheet, and they go from A all the way to Z. And if your data is longer or bigger, it will go on to A, B, etc., etc. So these columns represent attributes or fields of your data. Rows, these are the ones that go horizontal, and they are by numbers, 1, 2, all the way up to however long your data is. And these represent individual records and entries. The cell is the intersection between a column and a row. So this is where they meet. So for example, B2 is where column B and row 2 meet. So that's what the cell. And this is the fundamental unit where data is stored. Coordinate logic, and then again, Excel uses the same coordinate logic to reference data across the entire workbook. So what is the difference between a workbook and a worksheet? And you'll see me dive into this a lot more when we do practical. So you need to differentiate between which ones I'm referring to. The workbook is the entire file, and this is the completed Excel file. And it's usually when you save it, you can see the extension .xlsx. It acts as the master container of your data, of your formulas, and your settings. The worksheet is actually the individual tab where within a workbook. So professional models use separate sheets for inputs and calculations and also for outputs. We can actually save our worksheet separate, but our workbook we cannot. So for efficiency, we need to understand 4 fundamental ways of using our Excel. We have the command center, or what we like to call the QAT, and that's just a customizable area that stays visible throughout your Excel sheet, regardless of which ribbon tab you're in that you're currently using. The bypass, or bypassing the ribbon, is where you add your most used commands, and these usually are pasting values, filtering, freezing the panes so that you can easily eliminate unnecessary clicks, and tab switching. Optimal positioning, so for maximum efficiency, move the QAT below the ribbon. The ribbon again is the one at the top, and this places your tools closer to the grid, so it provides you with more space for your icons. And then shortcuts, you'll learn shortcuts much more the more you get used to your Excel, but essentially helps us execute things much faster without using our mouse so much. The anatomy of a cell. So like I said, the cell is the intersection, and the cell is the fundamental building block for Excel. This is how it understands our data. It's formed by the intersection of a column and a row, or a letter and a number. And it has a unique address or a unique coordinate. This address allows Excel to reference and link the data across the entire grid. And then the last thing is that the cell can store static values, so like numbers, text, dates, or dynamic like formulas, and this is dynamic logic. What you see is the result, and the formula bar shows the truth. And if you see my image here, you can see this is where the formula bar is, and this is, for example, this is how we read it. We go down and then across, so we read it like A1, and that is the individual cell. The logic of ranges, grouping data. So defining a range is just a collection of 2 or more cells. And we usually reference these in Excel with a colon to define a block. So such as A1 or C to C10. And that just means the range of A1 to C10. Contiguous and non-contiguous data. These are just ranges that can be solid blocks or separate areas, and they're held together by a comma. So for example, these two, and this is just a range, comma, and then another range. And these are held together by a comma. Named ranges, instead of A1 and B to B2, for example, you can name a range whatever you want, so sales data, and this makes the formulas much more readable much easier to understand and much easier to maintain. So formula anatomy, this is how a basic formula looks. And it starts with an equal sign. It must always start with an equal sign because this tells Excel to stop treating the cell like a text and start processing and understanding the logic that we want to go behind it. Then with your formula, you want to follow it by a function. So pre-built functions like sum if, or VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP, that they perform specific functions and operations in our data. Arguments are essentially, again, the logic that we want the formula to hold, so the information a function needs to work, and usually they're enclosed by parentheses. So in this case, you can see here we've opened a parentheses and we always want to close our parentheses, and they're separated by commas. So in the instance that I wanted to carry on and create a longer formula or a different logic, I'd use a comma to keep going. Operators, these are just our standard symbols, whether we want to multiply, divide, etc. And these perform calculations between our values or cell references. So in this instance, it says times 1.1. Relative and absolute. So we need to understand this when we are positioning or shifting between references. So a relative reference is the default. So when you copy a formula, the reference shifts relative to the new position. So if I drag this A1 and it had a formula like my equal sum formula, and I dragged it on the right hand and moved it across to B2, it would just repeat the same logic across the row. Whereas absolute, and you can see is the lock here, it locks the reference by using a dollar sign of to a specific cell, preventing it from shifting when the formula is moved. And there's other types of doing absolute referencing, and you can do this in a mixed format. So you can see, for example, the dollar sign either starts at the beginning or goes between the reference. So the real-time logic of understanding things inside of Excel, we have something called a dependency tree. Excel builds a map of which cells rely on others. This tree informs Excel exactly which formulas need to be updated when a value changes. Selective recalculation is, instead of calculating the entire workbook, Excel only updates the cells we call dirty cells, and those directly or indirectly are affected by change. Instant feedback loop. So this is the moment you press enter, the engine triggers. This is a real-time update that Excel makes for essential prototype or what if analysis, how we just mentioned. And then multi-threaded power. So modern Excel uses just a CPU process or core to process independent sections of calculations, and it makes it much speedier. The order of operations functions how, if you think back to maths GCSE, if you've ever thought of BODMAS, this is essentially the same of how Excel thinks about things. So it starts, any calculations inside of parentheses are always performed first, and we use them to override the default order. The default order is where exponents, other power calculations are performed after parentheses. And then if we wanted to multiply and divide, these are again performed from left to right, and they just hold equal priority. So whichever one comes first goes first in our logic. And again, with addition and subtraction, the final operations are performed also from left to right. So again, think back to BODMAS and how that level of order is given out in terms of a formula. This is exactly the same. So raw data, and this is number one rule, or a rule I want you to jot down and really take into account, where the raw data is the untouched source of truth. Raw data is the as is export of from a system database or external provider. It really represents the original unmodified state of our information. The reality is that raw data is often messy, contains duplicates, it's inconsistent, we've got formatting issues, and even missing values. This is really expected to happen. This is the norm of raw data, and it should be handled in the transformation layer. But the number one rule I want you to take away today is never edit the raw data directly. Always keep a pristine copy, a paper trail copy to ensure that you can actually trace back to the original source if any error occurs, and even if someone wanted to know how you attained what kind of analysis you attained. And it's also a good measure to create a read-only layer, and it just prevents any permanent damage or errors created to our raw data. Structuring our data. So we have different types of structures in our data. There's the tidy data standard. So essentially data is organized in a clean, predictable format where every row is a single record. So you don't have continuous stuff inside a single row. And every column is also a single attribute. Sometimes you might have things that are merged into a row and there might be a couple things instead of one. You will always want to ensure that there's a single record in one row and every column has a single attribute, so one to one. Also that there's no mixed content, so avoid mixing like the subtotals or the summary rows with the raw data. There should be no empty rows, no columns without data blocks in them, etc. Consistent data types. This is where each column must maintain a consistent data type. So if I had dates in all of my columns, I should ensure that there's no numbers in there, no individual numbers. And again, if I have letters, I should ensure that there's no numbers inside of that column, just to ensure that formulas and pivots function correctly and don't just start spitting out errors. So we've seen the theory of how to use Excel and how its logic and functions work. In the next lesson, we'll be looking at how to use it in a practical aspect and looking more into the interface. Hello everyone and welcome to the practical aspect of Excel. Today we're going to be looking at the Excel infrastructure and we're going to be creating our first sales tracker. So the first thing we want to do is check out the school community on how to download Excel. And then once you've got it downloaded, I want you guys to just open a blank document, and you can do that by just pressing it, or you can right click and open a blank workbook. So this is the first thing that you're greeted with when you open Excel, and we just want to press blank workbook. So you should get something that looks like this. So in Excel, we looked slightly on the theory of how it's laid out, but essentially we've got four main aspects that we use quite regularly when we're working with Excel. The first is at the top here, which is the ribbon, and it houses all of the things and aspects that we do inside of our analysis in Excel. So this, for example, is our home tab. Insert, draw, you can even have the data section, and you can see we can do loads of manipulations right here. So this is the ribbon. Right under the ribbon, we've got the formula bar. And again, like we looked at when we were looking in the theory, this is where you write your if formulas or whatever formula you're creating. So this is where it's housed. This section here is called the spreadsheet grid. And these are the cells that we spoke about. So essentially how the grid is read is it starts with the letters at the top here, and these are our columns, and then we've got on the sides here our numbers, which are our rows, and they go from A to Z and 1 to 100 or whatever number. The last thing I want you to see is on the right hand side here, there should be a summary. And we get that summary once we insert numbers inside of our sheet. So if I just type in 111 and then highlight my range. So all I did was just keep hold of the click button and then select, and you can see on the bottom here we get our summary numbers. The average is 1, the count is 3, and the sum is 3. And these obviously change when we change our numbers. So I'm going to change that to 2, and you can see that our average is now 1.3 and our count is 3, whereas our sum is 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete those. At the bottom here, you can see this is our sheet, and our sheet is called sheet 1. We can double click and just call it whatever we want to call it. And you can see there's a plus button here. If you just click out of it or press enter, you'll go back, and then you can see there's a plus button, and this we can add as many sheets as we want. To get rid of them, we right click, delete, delete. Cool. We've also got a scroller here which makes our data look bigger, and then again we can size as we wish. You can just click on the number down here and click on 100, and that's your default size. So I want to do something before I get stuck into my work, which is a good habit to get into, which is to save before you get started. So you can see there's a little icon here that looks like a disk. I want to click it, and then I'm just going to call this sales tracker. And then you can choose the location and where you want to store it. So I just want to save it into my files, and then click save. And you'll see automatically it will save, and you can see that from the top here, and you can see that's the file name. Sometimes you get the option to auto save. I don't like to keep this on, and you have to have you have to be logged into cloud, but I don't like to keep this on essentially because you can't undo a lot of the things that you do wrong. So I just like to keep saving as I go, and select that option myself. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little context on the data we're going to be dealing with today. And essentially, our data today is from the Awesome Chocolates Company. They just hired a new intern, Jess, and that will be us. We are Jess. Her job is to sell almond choco to some of our customers. Her manager has set her with the task of keeping track of all the chocolate sales done by her and the other sales representatives on her team. He will use this to understand how she's doing. Jess is quite new to Excel and she's never used it before. So, first thing we want to do is just select any row and just create a heading on what we want to create. So I'm just going to call this Jess's sales tracker. You can just click into the cell and essentially type it in. Okay. You notice that the cell is not wide enough to fit all of our text. So essentially you can do this in two ways. You can go ahead and click on the column, and then you can see there's a downwards arrow. That's how you select the column. And next to it, between C and D, the icon changes to this plus icon. Just go ahead and double click, and then there we go. We have automatically set our columns, or you can go ahead and just drag it yourself and size it however you want it to be sized. You can also do it a third way. You can click on this kind of arrow looking thing, and it'll select all of your sheet, and then again double click on any of the rows and it will size everything inside of this space. If you want to make the width bigger, we'll just go between 1 and 2 and then again drag down. So now we're getting something that looks like this. Because this is the title of our page, I want this to stand out, so I'm just going to highlight and make this bold. And again, I just want to highlight a couple rows and then merge and center, and then also just keep it in the middle there, and then a little bit up. Maybe I also want to give it a color background and make the text slightly bigger as well. Let's go with 36. Okay, we're looking good at the moment. Jess wants to track some basic data, so we're just gonna map out how we want our data to look. I'm going to type in date, name, email, email, boxes sold, and amount and payment method. Boxes sold, and then payment method. So again, we can go into here and resize our columns accordingly. So we just want to start typing in all of our input, some of our data that we have collected. I'm just going to go ahead and make this slightly bigger. But essentially how we read things in Excel is we're going to type in our first line, and we're going to put the 25th of August was our first sale. And that was in 2021. And then press enter. And you can see automatically Excel identifies this as a date. So if I click on it, I can tell it understands in the formula bar that it's a date, and then it's kind of summarized it in its own way. Sometimes as well, if you see in the ribbon at the top, you'll get something that looks like short date, long date. You can always change these, but for now, we're just going to stick to this. And she sold them to a person called James Johnson. And his email is j.johnson@gmail.com. And you can see obviously my columns are dragging over, so I'm just going to go ahead and resize them. That should say boxes sold, and then she sold 23 at an amount of 900. The payment method he used was cash. So this is what we call data input. And now we kind of have a basic structure for our sales tracker, and we have our first customer inputted inside of our data. Do a little resizing, double click, we're looking good. So the second thing we want to do is align our table and make it look more like a data input table. We can do that essentially by just formatting some of the things at the top here, and I just want to choose a color to make my table headers stand out. And then again, because these are my headers, I'm just going to make them bold. If I want to highlight everything in here, so I want to just go ahead and add all of my data. And then I'm going to just, essentially what I did was just copy this and then select the area in which I want to paste and just repeat that number. You can use Control C, Control V to paste. So I'll just show you guys that again. But highlight this section, Control C, and then let's say I just want to paste it into this section here, Control V. Or you can again paste your options out here. So this is what my table is looking like at the moment, but it's not really structured much like a table. So I can go over to my ribbon at the top and I can give it some sort of a table structure. And you can see I pressed insert table, and then does my table have headers? It does. So I'm going to press OK. You can see automatically Excel has this layout that identifies it as a table. And if I go on the top ribbon again, automatically I have this new tab now that says table design. I just want to call my table, for ease of use, data. And then I think I want to just format it a little bit easier to read, because now I can't read my numbers at the top. And then I might give it a blue heading. Again, you can play around with your table design at the top on the ribbon here and just give it whatever color suits. There's another way you can do this. So if we go back to our raw table, our raw data before it became a table, we can actually click on the first column in our table, and then we can also press Control T, and that automatically highlights our area that it identifies as my table, and then again it will show me exactly what to do to create a table. Then I just press enter and it creates it. Okay, so our table is looking good. Now what we want to do is essentially create our next part of our sales tracker. So for our amount, we want to make sure that it identifies this as dollars or pounds or some sort of figure. So at the ribbon at the top, there's a home section and you want to click on currency. Automatically, when you click on currency, you can see it basically gives you 2 decimal places automatically. So if I was going to do for boxes, it would essentially do the same thing. So you go at the top, go currency. But since our column boxes isn't a currency, I just want to keep this amount one as 2 zeros. If I wanted to remove these decimal places, I'll just go at the on the arrow that's towards the right to decrease the decimal places. And again, if I wanted to see more detail, I can increase them. Now, there's other ways we can look at our data. So assuming this data was big data and it went on for rows and rows, and we just wanted to get an idea and gauge of what's inside our data, then we can always go on the top here and you can see there's these drop down options. And if you click on them, you can see exactly what's inside your data, inside of that column. Now, if you don't have that option at the moment, don't panic. What you can do is just highlight this and then go into your home ribbon, and there should be an option here called sort and filter. If you just press filter, these boxes either come or they go. Okay, cool. So we want to also see our data from A to Z. And if I had different names in here, I could automatically see, for example, Andy, Joe, and I just wanted to have my A's at the top all the way from A to Z, then I can click on it and automatically Andy will now get changed to the top. All of its values will follow with it. So if you filter for this option A to Z, everything else will filter as well. And you can do certain aspects of, you can do certain filtrations based on whatever the type of column is. So I can go from here because it identifies that this is a number. I can do largest to smallest. So if I had like 43 in here, I can then press my largest to smallest and then I will get that filter there. And likewise with payment methods, if you wanted to see at a glimpse what you have inside of this column, then you just press on the filter and you can see if I had cash. I could also have pay by card or other aspects. I can always see all of them inside of here. If I added an extra value here and I put the 24th of August 2021 and I press enter, you'll see that Excel identifies that this is going to be part of your table that you just created. So it automatically gives us the same formatting across the rows. So that's quite helpful. And at the same time, if I just wanted to copy this across, I could drag it down or I could double click and get it back again. I don't have to do that to each column. I can actually just highlight all of my columns and then double click when you get this arrow, this plus sign, and then it automatically shows and populates. Okay, so what if we wanted to know the total amount of our sales quite quickly without having to do any formulas or any manipulation? Well, we can highlight everything again. And if you remember um, from when I was showing you guys the right hand side of our Excel sheet, we have the summarization here. And immediately it tells us all of our column in all of the amount in this column I amounts to 17,100. And if you see, I'll just highlight them and get 17,100. If I highlight the whole I, it's giving me the sum of 17,100. Okay, I want to move on and develop my sales tracker. So I'm going to go ahead and add another sheet. And this one I'm going to call the summary sheet. So I'm just going to call it summary, double click, and then press enter to lock it in. This one I'm going to rename to sales tracker. I want to keep my files quite consistent throughout when I create them. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and copy and paste in the exact same place. Make sure you've selected A1 because that's where we want to paste it. If I selected here, it will paste in here. So I'm just going to Control V, and then I get the same formatting throughout my table. If I wanted to get out of this kind of like um, dotted line, then I'll just press Escape or ESC on your keyboard and you'll get out of that. Okay, so for the summary, I actually want to create a more detailed view of my results. So I'm going to type in total boxes, for a more high level view, sorry, of my data. And I want to type in total boxes and total amount. And let's say our total amount was 20, our total boxes was 23, and our total amount was 25. Um, then we can actually use a simple formula. And if I wanted to see the formula right under this, because essentially this is a little bit of a table, then I will click into this cell and I'd, like we said in the theory, we always start with equals, and then I would just sum. And how you know you're doing it right is when you start to write any letter, you get a drop down of options, and you can do sum if, some ifs. But for this one, we just want to do sum. You can click it or you can just carry on essentially. So just double click that and then it will give you your beginning bracket. I can go ahead and tell it I want to sum the range. So F5 and F6 and then close my circle bracket and press enter. So now we've just created a basic sum formula which tells us that our total boxes and our total amount are 48. If I was going to change anything inside here, and let me put something completely different, you'll see automatically that this changes. And then if I click in my formula bar, I'll see what my range has been selected. I can always change my range and extend it as I want, but essentially this just shows us how what is the range. The reason sometimes we use some formulas and this kind of automatic change instead of just manually typing in is the ease of use. Anytime this changes and we refresh it, we'll automatically get our sum value here. So along any time where you want to use this, it'll just be much easier for us to get an automatic number than to just go every time to change it or to look at our summarization on the right. I'm just going to call this sum. So I want you guys to take away one thing from this lesson, and it would be that functions and formulas mean the same thing inside of Excel. So if you go over to the ribbon at the top, you can see there's an option called formulas. And if you have a look on here, this kind of gives us all of the function library or the formula library that we could use. Okay, so if I wanted to sum all of my table here, I can click into my table. And then if you go over to table design, I can see my table is called table 2, but I'm just going to rename it to data. And then go back to my summary. And then if I wanted to sum all of that in just one quick, without actually having to go into the sheet and summarize everything, I would just go into sum, and then I would reference my table, and you can see I'm referencing the right thing because I get this table grid instead of just FX, which means formulas. I'll press data, double click it, and then I want to actually open a square bracket, and then I can essentially reference the box, essentially reference my column, which in this case would be my boxes sold. So if you go back to our sheet, but it's just telling me that because my formula is not done. But if I go back to my sheet, you can see I want to look at our boxes sold. So that's column H. But essentially it will look like sum, and then the reference table, which is called data, double click, square bracket to reference the column. The column is called boxes sold. Close the square bracket and press enter. And this will sum all of our column here. And you can see it's right because if I highlight everything, and I'll see on my summarization, it says 457. Okay, so I want to do another sum analysis, and I want to also sum my sales amount. So I'm going to go in again and press sum, open my circle bracket, and then put sales, and then reference my square brackets. And then I want to put amount. I'm just noticing that I'm not getting the pop-up, so I just need to make a note of what the column is. So in our case, we've called it amount, not sales. So we go back, and then you can notice that if you're going wrong, essentially it's because you don't get the drop down. But yeah, sum, and then you put amount, and you can see instantly when I write amount and reference our data table, square bracket, and then press amount. And then it will automatically even give me the currency, and you can see it's a currency because of the pound sign, but if I click on it as well at the top here, will show our currency. We'll show the cell type, which is a currency. Okay, so if I wanted to just make this kind of stand out, I can go ahead and fill it, and then that will make that in particular stand out. But I can also go ahead and just highlight everything and press delete, but you'll notice that this still stays colored. The way you can do that is just to put no fill, and you'll go back to your clean data. Okay, now we want to do just some basic statistics, and I want to look at average boxes. I also want to look at average amount. And if you haven't guessed already, it kind of based on the same structure as the sum, but we are just changing slightly what the function is. So instead of equals sum, we'll have equals average. And we'll type in equals average, and you've got obviously the options of which ones you want. And then we reference our table, which is called data. We open a square bracket, and then we do boxes sold. I can type it in, I just prefer to write the option. And there we go. We've got the number of our average boxes. I think for me that's a bit too many decimal places, so I'm just going to go ahead and give it 2 decimal places. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and repeat for my average amount. So again, average, reference the table that you want, and then open the square bracket and then just find amount, close the square bracket and press enter. So we can look at our table in terms of a visualization in different ways as well. So Excel gives us the option to visualize at quite a basic level as well. So I can actually go into my data table here and then highlight the section of data that I want to look at and go over to my ribbon at the top, and I want to look for, in insert, I want to look for charts. And you can see these are your recommended charts or the charts that you can create within Excel. So for this instance, I'm just going to go ahead and explore some of my options. If I click on the little arrow here, you can see some of mine look like it's giving me scatter graph, it's giving me a histogram, it's giving me a tree map, waterfall. These are my options. I just want to have a 2D sideways bar chart. Okay, so we've got a basic understanding now of how our table looks in terms of visualization. In the case that this looked different, so if I just type in 300, you can see it will automatically change as well. So don't be alarmed, for example, that this looks the same, but if I was going to change everything, you can see it automatically changes my bars as well. I can also go into the settings of my chart itself and click on this plus here, and I can change the axis of what I want the chart to look like. So in this instance, I can change it to, I can remove the axis, I can add axis titles, I can even add the data table if I wanted to go that granular. I can add some error bars, that's for looking at anomalies, and I can even add a legend. So if I was going to look at one or more sections of my data and I needed to color code everything, I would add that in. There's other aspects as well. You can filter. So if you just want to specifically to look at one person out of the whole amount, we can go ahead and just highlight them and just filter them, or just deselect everything and just filter them. So that would look like that. If I wanted to select everyone else, that would look like that. You can always have some styles as well. That goes back to personal preference and I guess company colors, etc. I can also go into my chart and right click, and I can see here I automatically get some options. You can see if I click out of the chart area, I'll get more options, but whereas if I click inside, I get the ones that I want. So I'm going to just go ahead and press select data. And I get this window that tells me what kind of arrows or what kind of rows and columns do I actually want to look at. So if I was going to change this, I can either edit this way and then select again my data, or I can go back and add. And then again, I can select my range just by doing that. Press enter, press OK, and then I've got that in my data as well. I just wanted to look at that in terms of the name of the person, and then I press OK, you'll get a different chart. Looks a bit funky, so I'm going to go back and remove it. Click on this one, remove, press OK. So now it's not refreshed it, but you can go ahead and go back to your chart, either delete it rearrange the data how we did again. Sometimes Excel is a bit finicky in the way that it presents things. So if you kept highlighting what data you wanted and you saw that your graph didn't actually match, then you can go ahead and just reselect everything how I just did. Insert, go to our column. I think for this one you can do a histogram, but this one's giving me more structure, so I'm going to go with this one. And again, with these ones, you can always go into format, change colors, and highlight and manipulate things as you please. The way you want to do that is if you wanted to highlight something more particular than the other thing, and you wanted to make that obvious to the person looking at it, then I would start manipulating how it looks. And that way it will tell a much better data story rather than just having a graph and having all of the information in there. If I wanted to look at something quite granular, I would also just remove the other aspects and highlight the thing that I wanted to look at in particular. And you guys can see as well, there's more than one way to get what you want. So if I wanted to go ahead again and select my data, I'll see as soon as I press inside of my chart that I get the change chart type. I can even select my data at the top here. So you'll find that there's one or three ways of doing one thing essentially. I can rearrange my data as well how I want. I can format my plot area, and essentially this goes into kind of how you want it to look again. But that is a basic way you can highlight to Excel that you want to create a visualization. You can create more than one visualization inside of one of the datas, so inside of one of the tables. So for this one, for example, I'll click out of the area and then I'll press insert and then highlight, for example, let me add something in here like cash card, and so I can get just a bit more variety. And then I want to just highlight this. Instead of highlighting the whole thing, if you had lots of data, you could just highlight the whole column, or if you wanted to be very particular, you see that arrow, you can highlight through that. Insert, disable, and then again we can have a browse of what we want it to look like. At the minute there's not much variety in my data, so I'm just looking for a graph that can show me a bit more points than the ones I've shown. Maybe a bubble. And you can see this chart, when I click on it, it will show me that it's highlighting this data, and this is my X and Y axes. And if I click on this one, it's highlighting this column or this piece of data. And then again, you can see, for example, this one, it didn't really give me a chart title. I can just double click the whole thing and then type in payment method. And that is another way you can get a graph. Okay, so we want to look at our raw table again, and we want to click over on our I column and look at our amount. There's one way I can highlight to users or someone who's using it as to which number is, for example, the highest or the lowest amount. So you can see in my data, it's not very obvious because I've got all of these colors and formats in, but it's not very obvious that 300 is the lowest amount. And especially if I had big data, it'd be very hard to just go in and select which one. So I can actually go in and highlight my whole data that I want to look at, go into home and go into conditional formatting. And you can see in conditional formatting, this is an automatic way for Excel to be able to identify, for example, my top and my bottom. So which of my data is my bottom 10%? And you can see as soon as I hover over some of them, they give me a color, and that will highlight to me. There's also duplicate values. So if I press duplicates, it's going to show me that all of these are the same and they're all repeated. So that might be one way that I want to look at it. But I can always go in and see, for example, my top 10%. And that will be really useful when I'm presenting this to management or when I'm presenting this to my manager and showing them my top 10% of sales. I can always clear my rules from my selected area just by going back into conditional formatting and clearing my rules. Create my own custom rules as well. If I see that, for example, this one said, let's say I want it to be larger than 1,000. It's not going to be any of them. So it's highlighting everything. And then I can say, want to go into my manage rules and then create my own custom rules. So I can edit my rule, give it its own color, give it a kind of greater than symbol or not between. There's a lot you can look into in terms of conditional formatting. So if I wanted to just clear my rows again, I would go on my clear from selected cells, or if I wanted to clear from everything, I can clear from my entire sheet. So for this example, I'm just going to keep my top 10%. And you can see, for example, the 300 and the 400 are not in my top 10%. Okay, so for next lesson, I'm going to show you guys a little bit more on the basic statistics we use inside of Excel. Hello everyone, today we'll be exploring a little bit about basic statistics in Excel and how we'll use this raw data. If you haven't already, go ahead and download it inside of the school community, but we're going to be looking at basic data preparation and fundamental statistics. So this is our data, and we spoke about last time about our context. So essentially this is raw data from the awesome chocolates company, and they hired Jess in order to do some analysis on their almond choco and also their sales representatives. So this is our data, and you can go ahead and scroll down and see what kind of examples of data we have. You can see it's in a raw format, so essentially it's not in a table yet. And we've got our salespeople here, our geography, our product, amount, and units. The first thing we want to do is go ahead and press Control T and create this as a table. We're going to name our table data, and then we're just going to press enter. If you don't get that option, you can always go to the ribbon at the top, press table design and table name. Okay, now we're going to go over to our first tab, and essentially I want you guys to have this out in front of you or have it written down in your sheet, but essentially I'm going to show you how to create the average, the median, the mean, the max, and the range. And these are basic fundamental statistics we use in Excel, in Power BI, and in data visualization. So the first one is your average. And for average, we will create the formula equals average. And then we want to reference our data table. And then square bracket. And then for this, we want to, because it's amount, an average amount, we want to look at amount and close the square bracket. So we should be getting a number that looks like this. I want you guys to repeat that for the units. So equals average, the data table, and then open the square bracket, and then units. Close the square bracket. So we can do that, but Excel is quite smart in understanding that we have a pattern going on. So if we're going to do the average on this column, we can just go ahead and get this black cross and shift it over, and we should get the same number. If I go into my cell, I can see that it actually references the units, and here it's referencing the amount. So I can check what that formula, and if it's correct, I can check what it looks like up in the formula bar. Okay, so now I also want to do median. Again, we will use the function, the formula median equals median, data table, and I want to reference my amount column. Close up square bracket and press enter. And again, drag it over and check if it's right in terms of, is it referencing the right thing? Okay, so it's looking good at the moment. The third point I want you guys to look at is the minimum range in our table and the maximum. We're also going to be using the min function and then again referencing our data table. For this one, we want to create a square bracket, then create and press amount, close up our square bracket. And I can see that my minimum is now 0. So I just want to double check if that logic is correct and if it's actually showing the right number. So I can go ahead back to my data, and it was amount and it was my minimum. So I would just want to go into the drop down here and check that 0 exists. It does. So my minimum is actually 0. So that is correct. And then I just want to drag it over to the next one. Same thing with the units. It looks to be correct. And there we go. We have a 0 in there. So that's fine. Now we want to look at max. Same idea again. We want to create equals max, reference our data table, open a square bracket, amount, square brackets again, and press enter. We should get our max. Now our range is slightly different. Our range is our maximum minus our minimum. So in that case, I want to create a formula that tells me, okay, look at what my maximum is and minus it with my minimum. So I should get a number that looks like that. And then I can also go ahead and copy it over. So these are an overall of our basic fundamental statistics. For our first quartile, so our first quartile is essentially, we refer to it as the 1/4 point in your data when it is arranged and sorted in order. And the last quartile is 3/4 of points in our data, again, when it's arranged and sorted in order. So first quarter and the last 3 quarters, that's the first quartile and the last quartile. The way we calculate that is we do equals percentile and we want to do dot x or exe, but we will speak about the other ones later. But essentially for this example, we just want to use this one, and then we want to reference our data column. Again, open up, which essentially when we're saying reference our data column, we want to tell it what our data table, we want to tell it what column that is, and then we want to go ahead and close. And then we just want to go a little bit above and beyond, and we want to say that the range essentially is telling us here that we want to actually add a little bit extra. So I've gone ahead and added a comma, and for this case, a quarter is 0.2. So I'm just going to add 0.2 in the thing and press enter. And then we should get our first quartile. Our last quartile, same thing again, percentile, click our data table, reference our column, for this case amount, close it up, comma, 0.75. That's 3/4 of our data. And then we press enter, and then we'll go ahead and drag the rest on here. Okay, so my data's giving me some of my places they have 1 decimal place and some have 2. So we've got a little bit of a range inside of our data. If I just wanted to get 1, I could just go ahead and add in, either add 1 or just keep it as is, so that they all have the same amount of decimal places. Looks kind of messy, so I might just get rid of. So that is what it's looking like. Our unique and distinct count is essentially how many items do we have that are independent or unique inside of our data. So the way we can calculate that is equals unique. And then again, Excel's given me some help into what I need to reference. So I need to reference my array by column and then exactly once, which means it's unique essentially. We want to give it, you want to show me that thing exactly once. So for this example, it's actually our data and we want to see all of our unique products. So I'm going to go ahead and press product, open a square bracket, and then go ahead and close your circle bracket and press enter. And there you go, we can see all of our unique products, no duplicates, independent ones. So once you've done that, you can actually go into your formula and specify to it. For example, I don't want to see all of my unique products. I just want to know how many there are. And I can go into my formula at the top here where I wrote my formula and go to my formula bar at the top and actually just tell it to count. I want to use count A of my unique products and just give me essentially the number in which I need to in order to give me the number that I want. I can see there's a little, and now my circle brackets are actually red, which is telling me that I'm missing a circle bracket. So I'm just going to go ahead and add one to the end and press enter. And I should get a distinct count for my products, which is 22. Okay, so that's a little bit on data preparation and fundamental statistics. In next lesson, we'll be looking at exploring our data into more details. Hello everyone and welcome to this part of the Excel exercise which we'll be looking at exploring our data in more detail and making more insights on our raw data. So in our last lesson we created our raw data and created this table. So today we're going to look more into data exploration and we're going to use that through conditional formatting. We're also going to be looking at sales by country using formulas, and we're also going to be looking into pivot tables. So the first thing I want you guys to do is go ahead and open your data sheet. And in your sheet, I just want you to highlight the column that is amount and go into our conditional formatting on the top ribbon here, and then we just want to look at color scale and press on color scales. So now we get this kind of color mirage, and if I kind of zoom out, I can see my whole sheet is any color from dark green to dark red. But in order to make sense of this data, I can't actually look at the table kind of zoomed out, it's too small. So I want to just go back to my normal view and go into my column and actually tell it to show me the largest first, and automatically you can see the color gradient goes from dark green to all the way into red, but this is my largest amount, and then automatically also shows me my units. But let's say I wanted to show more detail inside of my unit section. I'll go ahead and highlight this column that I want to look at and then go into my conditional formatting and press data bars. You can use whatever data bar color you want, but essentially now it's giving me more of an indication of how high and how low my units are. I can also go ahead and filter this by largest to smallest, and you can see it will automatically filter the amount column as well. You kind of have to filter either or, so we can't actually get the largest amount or the largest unit at the same time because they can't exist at the same time. So that's a little bit into what my data looks like at a glance using conditional formatting. Now I can also go into this conditional formatting and kind of explore in more details what my top 10 could look like, etc. But in order not to confuse things, I just want to clear the rules for my selected cells. And then I want to show the top 10% of, or the top 10 items in my amount section. And I'll press OK. And then it looks like it hasn't done anything. If I scroll down, you can see, oh, for example, one of them has shown. But if I go into my filter and I sort by color, I can now see that these top 10 items are my best selling items. And then I can draw from them some insights for my manager or for someone who wants to see that. I can also do that in my units column. So again, I'll go into conditional formatting. And let's say this time I want to look at my worst performing in terms of units. And then I just want to see those. So I can go in and then you'll see these are my worst performing numbers out of all the rest. And again, it will show me my top 10. I can actually go in and specify. So I can say to it, manage rules, bottom 10, edit rule, and then here I just want to look at 5, and then I can press OK, and then OK again, and then you can see now I can filter by a color again, and it will just show me my worst performing 5 products. So this kind of looks messy to me, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove the rules. Okay, so that is more insight into exploring our data. I now want to go into looking at my sales analysis, and I'm going to do a sales analysis by country using formulas, and then I'm going to show you how to do that using pivot tables much faster. So when we're creating our sales analysis, I want you to just create a rough table, and this table is a country, amount, and units table. And we saw 2 ways in order to find our unique values in our table. So we can do equals unique, and then we specify the table name, then we specify the column, which is geography, and then we close up our bracket, and then we just press enter. So it's shown me all of my unique products, all of my unique countries by order. And then I can even go into my filter at the top here and order them by A to Z. Okay, because it's an array, it might not let me, so I can actually copy and then paste as a value. So there should be an option here to paste formula as a value. Oh, it's down here. And then you can see that that blue ribbon around it is gone. So now I can order my stuff by A to Z. If I didn't want to do this, I can actually go ahead and copy my data and paste it into here and remove my duplicates. So the way I can do that is go into geography, Control Shift all the way down, copy your data. So what I did was Control Shift down at the same time, and that copies all of my data from top to bottom. I can also go Control Shift up and copy everything, and then just Control C to copy, and then go in here and paste. And while it's selected, I can go over to my ribbon at the top, go into data, remove duplicates. And there we go. It's showing me that I have 6 unique geography codes or unique countries. Don't actually want this, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And then if you see like it only deletes the values and you actually want to just keep things neat, you can go over to Home, Format Painter, kind of like Word, and then just paste it out. Okay, so now I've got my unique values in my table. And now I want to look at looking into my amount and my units. So the way I look at amount is a formula that we call a sum ifs formula. So the sum is essentially the add, and it adds values that meet specific conditions. Okay, so in our case, we want it to bring us back, again, referencing our table. We want it to show the column amount, and then I want to go ahead and have an extra bit about my geography. So I want to go in, add my geography, and then reference the cell that we have here. So in our case, it is C5. And I'll explain a little bit what I mean by this formula. But essentially, this formula is just telling me I want you to sum these two conditions if the amount is XYZ and the country is XYZ. So if it meets that criteria, then I want you to sum it. If it doesn't, then not. And then again, like whenever we open a circle bracket, we always want to close it. So then go ahead and press enter. Okay, so we've got our amount now, and essentially what is saying is Canada is got this much amount. And if that's right, we can go ahead back to our data and check. We can go in here, filter, and then go into amount, control shift all the way down, and then check, and we can see it is correct. So what we want to do is go ahead and drag that for the rest of our countries. Okay, we want to reproduce the same logic for our units. And essentially we're going to use again our SUMIFS formula and then reference our data table, square bracket, units, close off the square bracket, and then define the geography that we want it to give us. Close off the square brackets, and then again reference our cell. Press enter, and it should automatically give us the number. We can drag it all the way down, or we can double click and populate. Okay, so since this is amount in dollars, I'm just going to go ahead and change the currency into US dollars. And then I'm going to get rid of the decimal places. Perfect. This is our units column, so I might give it an extra comma just to tidy up that so I know it's in the thousands, and then get rid of the extra decimal places. Okay, perfect. We just want to do a little bit of formatting so that we can feel like it's a table and not just random data. So at the top here, I'm just going to go ahead and add some color in, bold, maybe even give it a little bit of a border as well. Let me see. There we go. Perfect. I'm liking the way it's looking. Okay, so I can do an extra step which helps me in the visualization of my data, and I'm just going to select this column and then insert a column. And you can see the formatting is automatically done, so that's perfect. But essentially what I want it to show me is a data bar, which is a sort of visualization for my amounts column. So I'm going to go and equals, press on the cell next to it so that it pastes the exact same number, and then copy it all the way down. And then go over to your conditional formatting, your bars, and then you can see that we get the data bars as well as the numbers. But I actually feel like this is kind of messy, so I'm going to go into manage rules and then edit rules, and that's the only rule I have, and then show bar only. Press OK again, and we should get something like that. So I think that looks beautiful. I think I like green more. Okay, and then we can just resize that and possibly just sort out. Okay, showing me that it's an array and then we can't do it. Sometimes we can. But essentially, you should get a sales analysis that looks something like this. Okay, we can actually do this exact same analysis inside something what we call a pivot table. And it's just a much faster way of giving us that same level of detail. So the way you do that is click anywhere inside of sheet 4 and go to insert and then pivot table up the top. Click on the section right under the and then from table emoji, from table range. I was going to say it's got the table emoji here, but you can go into this and I can actually press the arrow and select my data, but since my data is quite long and I might miss some things, I can just go in and specify that I want it to look at the table called data and press OK. And I can also rename my pivot table at the top here. I just want to call it maybe sales analysis. Enter. So now I have a pivot table. Not yet, but I have a structure for a pivot table. I have my sales analysis here that I made with formulas, and I've got my raw data. Okay. Inside of my pivot table, I have this section on the right called a pivot table field, essentially. This is the way it's structured. It's in columns, rows, values, and filters. And if you're going to notice, I can press on the box here and automatically get a unique value for that column. And you can see it goes straight into the row. Or I can actually drag and drop it inside of that. And I can also check it in columns and it will just give it to me vertically. Okay, so in our case, we actually want to create the same as we did with our sales analysis here. So the first thing I'm going to do is click my geography. And I can see automatically I got that same field unique values straight away inside of my pivot table. I can also go into my amount and press it and I automatically get a sum of amount inside of values. Alternatively, in the field section, I can just drag and drop. And the same thing with units, just drag and drop. Go over to pivot table analyze at the top and you can see some extra features have come up. Won't go into them much at the moment, but I want you to go over to design and just have a play around with some designs that you like. I think I'll go for this one. Okay. I can actually, in this case, because it's not an array, filter it from A to Z. And then I can also see my grand total that automatically gets set up with a pivot table. You can see as soon as I click into my pivot table, I get the field back. And if I click out, it actually goes. So that essentially populates when you click inside of the pivot table. If you don't get this option when you click it, so sometimes you click into your pivot table and look, I don't automatically get the pop-up. I'll just go and click inside my pivot table again so that I get pivot table analyze and then I'll click on field list and it should come back up. Okay, again, I'm going to go ahead and create a extra insert. No, it is not like that. So what I'm going to do, as you guys saw, you can't actually insert in here because a pivot table is just a set table. Excel doesn't like to play around with it. But what I can do is go into my fields pane at the right and then just drag amount between my values here, amount and units, and get that same row again, and get that same column again. So now I've got two columns that look identical. Again, I can go over to my conditional formatting, highlight the sections that I want to format, data bars, and click my data bars that I want. I actually don't like the title here, so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to notice pivot Excel does not like an empty title, so I'm just going to call it bars. And again, I want to get rid of my numbers here. So manage rules, edit rule, show bar only. Okay, okay, perfect. We've got the same result in much less hassle and a much cleaner view as well, and also more automatic. So you guys can see if my column as well is too narrow, you'll get those hashtags. If you double click, you'll get them back. They're not an error, it just means that your column is a bit too narrow. Okay. I actually want to go in here and get rid of my grand total at the top. So I can go over to Pivot Analyze and then look for that option. Sometimes it appears in different places, but we can either actually go into here and then remove grand total as well. Again, my data bars have gone, so I'm just going to go ahead and make them again. Manage rules. I can see I've got two rules here, but I will edit those later. So show bar only, press OK. Now you should get something that looks like that. Okay, so in my pivot table, I can actually go into a bit more detail. And the way I can do that is if you guys wanted to see the sum of amount and the sum of units per salesperson, we'll just go over to our pivot table again, go over to the field pane and right click on salesperson. And then you can see this section here called add a slicer. Now, slicer essentially is like a filter in which we can see exactly our salesperson, what they look like, and if we press, it's dynamic. So it changes as soon as we press that person. And here you can select more than one person, but just want to remove that option and keep it like this. Okay. I want to do a little bit of formatting and editing to that slicer, so I can go at the top here, and as soon as you add something, it's quite dynamic that you can see an extra tab at the top here. And then I just want to increase my column to 2, and there you go. You can see all of your salespeople. You can even go into more detail, but I think this one is perfect. And then you can see all of your salespeople without having to scroll. Dynamic again. If you wanted to just get rid of that selection, just press that filter button. Okay. Now I actually want to move on to a bit more analysis, which is I want to see my top 5 products. I want to see my top 5 products per unit sold. And for this, we need to do a bit more analysis, and we'll do that inside of pivot tables. So insert pivot table, and again, just select that table that we call data. Okay, I'm going to be a bit annoying and tell you to delete that pivot table and then go on to insert pivot table again. And we missed one thing, which is quite crucial to our next step, which is add the data to the data model. And now you can press OK. So now you should get something that looks like this. The reason add to a data model looks different is because you can see our model here has changed. Our selection now looks like a table where it has different columns inside of it, nested within it. And this structure applies to Power BI as well. It looks like it's the same dynamic or the same idea. So I would take note of that. Okay, so in terms of our analysis, I want to drag in my product into my rows, and now I have all of my unique products. I also want my amount and my units. So my sum of amount and my sum of units. Okay, perfect. Now, in order to get the item per unit sold, I can go in and just create a formula and calculate it by just a formula, or I can just get Excel to do it inside of my pivot table and make it look much neater. So the way I do that is go over to your data model pane, right click, add measure, and you'll see this pop-up come up, which is essentially the same as the same one that happens in Power BI as well. So if you click here, check DAX formula, DAX comes up in Power BI as well. And DAX just means data analysis expression. So it's just a formula essentially. I want to call this measure sales per unit. And you can see, like always, it begins with an equals. And then what we want to do is just go ahead and specify what we want to do, which is sum of amount, because we want to find the item per unit sold, we want to divide that by the sum of unit. So sum of units. You should get the drop down. If you don't, just check that you are writing it correctly. And I want it to give me this back as a currency. I want that currency to be in US dollars because that's what we're using. There we go. And then I want it to give me 0 decimal places. Or actually I want it to be 2 decimal places like a pound sign. And then I'm just going to press OK. And there we go, it's added this FX type of thing, and that's because we essentially made a DAX formula, and then we can go ahead and add it in. You can change the order of these by just changing the order, but I just want to keep it right at the end. So now if you look at our pivot table, we can see we've got the sum of amount, the sum of units, and even the sales per unit. Okay, so I just want to see just that, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest. And then I also just want to see the top 5 maybe for my products. So what I can do is go ahead and here, and then press on the drop down, go into value filters, top 10, and then I want to just specify that you want top 5, and then I can press OK. So now I've shown my top 5 items per unit sold. Okay, so in our next lesson, we're going to look at what the anomalies mean in our data and how to spot them. We're also going to do a little bit onto how to detect our best countries and our worst countries by salesperson. Hello everyone and welcome to Pivot Tables. Today we'll be diving into 9 pivot reports that are essential for our sales performance reporting. So I want you to go ahead and open up this file, and the first thing we're going to do is create a table out of our raw table. And how we saw last time is we can either just select our table, or we can click on the first cell, Control Shift to the right, and then while you keep hold of it, Control Shift bottom, and then Control T, and then you should get this icon or this pop-up that tells you, do you want to make this a table, and you're going to press yes. So now our data has been turned into a table, and it's always best practice to name your data table as something that's quite easy to understand so you can later reference, and also when you maintain it, it'll be much easier to reference. Okay, clicking inside of our table again, we want to go to insert and we want to add the pivot table. From table range, click yes, and automatically Excel gives us the option to add this to a new worksheet. I do want to add it, and it's already identifying that I want to use the table sales, which I just called, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to press OK. So you're going to see that this is our first sheet. Now, for ease of use, I have already added a sheet here for you guys to keep everything nice and neat. So what you can also do is come over to report 1, insert, pivot table, from table range, and I want to use the table sales. Existing worksheet, so I don't want to create a new tab, and then I press enter and I should get something that looks like this. Okay, perfect. When I click into it, I should get my fields list. If I don't, I can always add it at the top into fields list here. Okay, my first report will be my total sales by person. And the way I'm going to do that is firstly drag my salesperson into my rows. And then I can also add in my amount. I can add it two ways. I can right click and then add it to values because it has numbers in there. Or I can just drag it into my values section and I will get a table that looks like this. Automatically, Excel sums our column here because it's identified that there's numbers in there and it's just automatically given us a sum of amount. It's also given me the formatting, but in case I didn't have this formatting, I can just go into here, right click, and then also add my formatting in there. And you can do that by number format and then go into currency and you can check these symbols. So in this example, it's perfect, but if I didn't have this, I would go in and add my details. So if I wanted to change the default currency, I'd go in there and do that. I just want to give it a little more visual representation. So since we're talking about our chocolate factory here, I just want to add this nice chocolate color. Okay, perfect. Our second report will be our sales by person and geography report. And these will get progressively more detailed as we go. So again, insert pivot table, table range. I want to use the table sales. Okay. Now, what we want to do for this one is add our salesperson into our rows and also add in our geography. So salesperson and geography. And it brings up this kind of elongated table, which is what we call a double layered pivot table, a double layer table. Because if we look at this section here, we can see it has kind of like a drill down effect. So it's also showing me, for example, for this salesperson, bar and all of the countries under him, Brian, all of the countries under here. And this is what we call a two-tier table. And I want to also add my sum of amount. So I'll add that into my value section. But if I go ahead and change the formatting of what this looks like and just drag my geography into my columns, you can see I get this more matrix looking table and it's much, much neater. Okay, cool. For my second report, and again, you can just do a little bit of visual design. And I'm going to go again with the same, actually go in with a darker color. Okay, my third report is going to be my sales by person with a geography filtering aspect or with a geography slicer. So I'm going to just zoom out slightly, insert pivot table from table range, sales, and press OK. Okay, so for this report, I want to add in my amount in my values. And then I also want to add in my salesperson inside of my rows. But now I want to go in a little deeper and actually show my salesperson by geography or by location. And the way I can do that is just drag my geography to my filters, and you'll see instantly I get the option to choose which one of the countries I want. This specific example, I'm just going to use New Zealand, and you can see I only see the sum of my amount for the country New Zealand. And again, visually good, visually pleasing. If I didn't have the formatting here, I just right click and go to number format and select my correct format. Okay, my fourth report is my top 10 products by customers. So the way I'm going to make my top 10 products by customers is to go ahead and add in my products in my rows. And then I also want to add my customers inside of my value section. And you can see we get this normal tabular form that we always get. But now I've got the sum of my customers inside of the column C and my top products inside of B, my unique products. And automatically it showed me them by alphabetical order. But in the instance I want to do a little bit more drilling down, I can go into the drop down here, value filters, and then I just want to show the top 10 and press OK, and there we go, it's shown us our top 10. Okay, so if I wanted to do my top number of customers as well as salesperson, I can just go in how we did with the geography and add my salesperson to my filters, and you can see instantly at the top there I get the option to choose who I want. I can choose Gigi and I'll press OK, and it will automatically show Gigi's numbers. I can also go in and filter this A to Z, and you can see Gigi's top selling was after nines and her bottom or her worst, no, sorry, largest to smallest to see what that looks like. But if I just wanted to see this by alphabetical order, I will start with the one on the A. Highest selling was the spicy special slims, and her lowest would be the after nines. For our fifth report, we're going to create an interactive pivot pivot chart or a pivot report. And the way we're going to do that is, again, add in our table. And then we're going to drag in our salesperson, drag in the sum of our amount, and then have something that we call a slicer in our geography section. So if you saw, I just right click on geography, add a slicer, and I get this option. And this is a interactive pivot report or a pivot chart. The way it's interactive is if I click into any country, you can see that my numbers change accordingly. And if I just didn't want to click USA anymore, I would just remove the filter in there. Okay, so that is our interactive pivot report. Our sixth report is our pivot chart. And the way we create a pivot chart is when we insert, and we want to do something a little bit different. And so our sixth report is our our pivot chart. And the way we insert a pivot chart is when we go to our traditional insert pivot table, we can see that there's actually an option here to create a pivot chart. So I want to actually click on that instead of adding my normal table. Add it in the same way and then press enter. So you can see as soon as I do that, we get this pop-up that gives me the pivot and the chart. And this is going to be our visual representation. Okay, so for this example, we want to add in our geography as well as look at our amount inside of our values, and you can see my chart has automatically shown how that looks, and you can see my table there has got a summary of those representations here. We can go over to the plus sign here and check our chart elements. So in the instance I wanted to drill down and make this different, I would go into my chart elements and do that. But in this example, I'm just going to show you guys how to edit slightly the way that it looks. Maybe go with this filtering, this kind of design here. Okay, perfect. I also want to add in a geography slicer. So the way I can do that is to right click and add a slicer, and then I get the option to add in my slicer. And again, if I press on New Zealand, you can see that my chart will instantly change as well. A little bit of a delay, but it does change. Okay, perfect. The other thing I can do is go over to my table here and click down, value filters, and just again show my top 5 countries per item. So in this case, I'm just going to type in a 5, and you can see it changes. Instantly we get a graph that shows our top 5 products, and then we can also go into here and then we can sort from largest to smallest, and now our graph has this cascading effect instead of just randomly being added. If I wanted to get rid of this total, because I know that it's a total already, I'll go into my chart elements and get rid of that legend. So now I've got more graph space. Okay, perfect. Our 7th report is our total and percentages report. And the way we do that is we're going to again add a pivot table, add in sales, and then we're going to add in our salesperson, our sum of amount, and then again I want to add in the sum of amount twice. So now I get this sum of amount 2 and sum of amount normal. I want to do the filtering that we kind of looked at before and add in a conditional format. But before I do that, I just want to show this as a percentage. And I can do that by right clicking in here, show value as, and it will show me an option of things that I can do. In this case, I'm going to do a percentage of the total column. And you can see instantly I get a percentage of my sum of amount. Again, on the home tab, I can just specify how many decimal places I want. If I wanted to do for all of them, I can also, there we go, same for this one. So I'm getting a percentage here on my sum of amount 2 and my normal sum of amount. So this is a percentage of my column. I now want to just go in and add a slight conditional format how we saw before. And for this one, I'm going to add a data bar. And I'm going to add this green one here. And you can see it automatically applies this data bar to the first column, to the first cell in my column. I also get this option with the click down. I can press it, and then I can also do press and add this all formatting to the rest of my table. So you can see I added it there, and that's the one we want. We want to do all cells showing amount of amount to, values for the salesperson. So while that sounds a bit confusing, it's just telling me, do you want to create that for the rest of your numbers inside of your table? Okay, cool. And now I can go into my conditional formatting. I can manage the rules, again, edit and only show the data bar. I can also specify, because all of my numbers are within a 9% to 12% range or 11% range, I actually want to just specify that I want this at a 0.25% or 25%, and click OK. And then I press OK, and then I get this bar. I actually wanted to keep the numbers in there as well. So there we go. You can see they automatically align on the right hand side there. And now our data bars look much better. Okay, in the instance that I wanted to add data to my raw data here, what I can do is go to the bottom of my table, and let's say in this instance I just wanted to add an extra line for Gigi. I would just add it to the bottom, and you can see Excel automatically gives us a format, the same formatting. And I wanted to add Australia, and then let's say we wanted to make it smooth silky salty, and a number of 1,200 at 24 units. Okay, have a look at this number here and see if it has changed for you. The way you can do that is go over to your pivot here and press refresh, and you can see mine has changed from 312 to 313. And that way you can actually maintain your pivot table at a pace where if you added new data to it, all of your reports will now refresh onto the new number that you just added. Okay, our 8th report is going to be our top 5 salespeople by geography or by location. And the way we're going to do that is, again, go into our pivot, insert, pivot table, from range, press enter. And then we're going to show our salesperson, our geography, and then we're going to show our top 5. So in this case, top 10, and then we're going to specify top 5. Perfect. And then again, we want to just add a little bit of a visual ambience to fit our company logo and our company structure. Okay, perfect. So this is our sales report from start to finish. Report 9 is a little homework that I want you guys to get up to, and that is going to be added into the community at the end. So have a look at how to create your own report 9. But if you followed along with all of these, you should have now created 1 out of 8 reports inside of pivot tables. Hello everyone, and welcome to the last section of our Excel analysis. Today we're going to be exploring anomalies in our data, and we're going to be looking at the best salesperson by country. Also, we'll be delving into profit analysis and creating our first dynamic dashboard within Excel. And then lastly, we're just going to answer the question of which products have been discontinued. So I want you to go over to the 6th tab on the bottom, and then before we get into it, I just want you to remove any filtering that you have inside of your table, because that will skew our results. Go over to the first column cell, and then Control Shift all the way across, all the way down, Control C, and then I'm just going to go ahead and paste it over here. Okay, perfect. Make these slightly bigger. And there we can see we've just copied and pasted our raw data inside of our sheet. Now, in order to look at anomalies, and the reason we look at anomalies is because we want to see how to improve the accuracy of our data. Anomalies are points in our data that stand out and that may skew our visualizations and our results. And you can see our data is quite long, so it would be irrational for us to just sit here and look for the anomalies. And in this case, if it was, for example, units were sold with 0, but we made an amount of 5,000, that could potentially be an anomaly, but we just don't really know what that looks like because we've got so many rows. So the way we can do that is go over to your amount column here and then get that little plus, get that little arrow, drop down arrow, or again, you can press Control, get this one and this one. So now we've just copied, now we've just selected our amount and our units column. I want you to go over to the top here and look for Insert. And then I want you to look for a graph that we call a scatter graph, and it should look something like this. This is our scatter graph, and essentially just gives us an understanding of the distribution of our data. So most of the points start, and you can see on this axis we have the amount, and then on the y-axis we have our units. But most of our data is distributed within this section of the graph, whereas these points here stand out alone. So these are potentially anomalies we would look into. Now, we don't want to automatically just think we want to delete them, because sometimes these anomalies will actually be data results and not just errors. And sometimes we want to just look at things differently in terms of our analysis. So go in and explore why that anomaly looks like that. And you can do that by asking, for example, someone on the team and being like, does this look like a number that would be correct? And just delve in deep into why that anomaly looks like that. The other way, or the other graph that we can look at, is one we call a box and whisker chart, or a box plot. Now, to find a box plot, we want to go into Insert, and we want to just actually show it. We want to look at our amount column, and then if you go on this histogram looking graph, you can click on box and whisker and you'll get this looking distribution. Okay, so what does this actually mean in terms of a graph, and what does it actually show us? The way we read our box plot is essentially this point here is our lowest point in our data, our minimum. The points here are our outliers or our anomalies, and instantly we can recognize that there's 4. This is our maximum, so this line that goes across is our maximum. This is our upper quartile. So you guys know we did our 3/4, etc. formulas. This is our upper quartile. This is our lower quartile. Inside, this is our median. And then finally, this X here is our mean. So that gives us a little understanding of our distribution of graphs, our distribution of anomalies. I can actually also give it an extra layer, and that will look like, if we go over to amount and then just keep hold of Control and also choose geography, we can go over to Insert and then also add a box and whisker, and we can see we've got a deeper, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points or 6 graphs that will show us a deeper level per country of our anomalies. And you can see instantly, for example, the USA's got 2, the UK has 1, Canada has 1, and you can see our graphs look slightly different because our maximums and minimums are different. Our median and our mean are also different. So we might have a longer box plot or we might have a much shorter one. Okay, now we want to look at our 7th tab, and we want to actually explore our best salesperson and our worst salesperson by country. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do it through a pivot table. So go into Insert Pivot Table and then go ahead and identify the table name. And then this time I want you to add it to our data model and then press OK. If in the instance I forgot what my table name is, I can go over to my raw table and go in table design and add and check the name here. Okay. For this one, I just want to add in geography. And then I also want to add in my salesperson. So now I have this two-tier power pivot pivot table, which shows me my country, but also shows me my salesperson under it. I also want to add in the sum of my amount or the amount, and then it will automatically sum it. And I also just want to see my top performing person based on each country. So the way I can do that is go over the top, right click, click into one of the values, right click, and you should get the option to filter, top 10, and then you just look for and add top 1 person. So I can see instantly my best performing person is Gigi in Australia, Gigi in Canada, Gigi in India, whereas it's Jess, Bar, and Ram in the rest of the countries. So what I've just done there is also made this into a currency table, just highlighted it and gone and created and added currency. I can change my currency right at the top there. I'm also just going to neaten this up and get rid of the decimal places. The way you want to do that is you just want to highlight these and then go in and do that. Now I actually want to see my worst performing salesperson or sales representative. And I'm just going to copy this table, Control C and then Control V, expand my columns. And then instead of having a filter for my values at the top, I can actually go in and look at my worst performance. I'm going to put my bottom 1. And I can see that it's GG for Australia. So this is how to see our worst person performance by country and our best. I want to challenge you guys, and I want to give you the challenge of writing this as a formula and seeing if you can use some of the things we learned to write as a formula to get a result. So that's a little extra challenge. Okay, now we're going to delve into our profit analysis. And in order to do our profit analysis, we're going to have to manipulate and combine our data a bit more. So if you notice, then well done to you. But if you scroll over to the right, we actually have a hidden product table here, which is going to help us do our product analysis. Okay, so in order to do this, I'm just going to make myself a little extra room. And I'm going to add insert and make extra 2 columns here. This column I'm going to call cost per unit. And then again, make it slightly bigger. And this time I just want to use a VLOOKUP. And I want to look up my product table and also look into my cost per unit table. So the way we're going to do that is we're just going to use this @ symbol. And then that essentially defines the row that we want to do it in. And then I want to add in product. So before you get into that, you want to add a square bracket, otherwise it looks like that. And then you want to add product. So what I've said to it is I just want to look at column product inside of my data table, and then close my square bracket, and then look at my products table. So this table on the right is called a product table, or that's what we've called it. And then go ahead and close that. And then I want to just define again inside my product table, I want to look at product. Close your square bracket and then comma. And then I want to add in products, and that is going to be cost per unit. So inside of my product table, I want to look at cost per unit. Close my square bracket, and then just make sure that everything else is closed off and press enter. And there we go. We've got our cost per unit. I want to add in an extra column for the cost so that I can have a look more into what my data looks like. So essentially I'm going to add in a column here called cost. And for cost, I'm going to do the same idea, but this time I'm going to do at square bracket cost per unit. And then as soon as I close the bracket, it knows exactly what I'm doing. And then I just want to go ahead. I missed the square bracket here, so I'm just going to add that. And then since I've got two square brackets open now, I'm going to add another square bracket closer. So two open, two closed, and then add Shift 8. And Shift 8 essentially gives me this multiplication symbol inside of Excel. Open a square bracket at units. So this is in my units table, or in my data table, but it's units. And then it immediately identifies where that is. And then I just want to double check I'm not missing any square brackets or open brackets, and then press enter. And then you can see it's populated my cost as well. Okay, so now I just want to dive into my profit analysis in here. And the way I'm going to do that is insert a pivot table using that data formation transformation that we just did, and go ahead and add in all of these details. So I'm going to reference my data table, and then I want you guys to tick add to data model and then click OK. Okay, so this time we have this data table, but all of the columns that we inserted haven't actually come up yet. So the way we can add them is if we press refresh at the top here, we'll see now they auto populate, because essentially what Excel does is it makes a pivot cache based on the first ever time in which you did a pivot. So in order to tell it, okay, no, I've got new functions, I've got new tables, we just go ahead and refresh. Okay, so I just want to drag product into my rows, amount into my values, as well as cost. And then you can see I get this table design. I want to go in an extra step, and we looked slightly about DAX last lesson, but I want you guys to get the hang of it, and we will be using that in Power BI as well. So in order to add a measure, we right click, we add measure, and then we get this pop-up that says, what do you want your measure to be called and what do you want inside it? So for this one, I'm just going to call it total sales. And then that is what our measure is called. We've got the option here to check the DAX formula, and also this FX just means it is a formula. But in our case, it always starts with an equal, and we want to just add in our sum of amount. And we want to minus it by the sum of our cost. So that's going to give us our total profit. I've written total sales and then total profit. And then we just want to do a little bit of categorization for our data. So we're going to go into currency automatically. Because I'm in the UK, it goes into pounds, but I want US dollars because that's what my data is in. And then we'll have a look. English United States dollars, and then 0 decimal places, and I just want to press OK. And now that we have our total profit, I just want to add it into my table as well. You can see again, it's automatically categorized it based on what we told it. And then again, it's got our decimal places here. If I wanted to get rid of them, I'll just click on it and get rid of them. If I wanted to get rid of all of them, I'll highlight and get rid. Okay, we can do a bit more manipulation to our data as well. Um, and we can just categorize them by A to Z or by Z to A. But essentially, we just want to look at profit for the sake of this exercise. So I'm just going to get rid of them. I want to add a little bit extra depth to my profit analysis. So I'm going to actually add in a slicer by geography. And we looked at slicers a little bit last time, but essentially we can go into our slicer settings and make this look a little bit different. And then we can get a dynamic view of our sales analysis. Okay, perfect. Now we want to jump into our dynamic dashboard and we're going to create a dashboard from scratch. The dashboard essentially is going to have a dynamic pick where we can pick from a list of our countries, and automatically that will change the number of our transactions by salesperson as well as amount and units. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a pick, a country title here. I'm going to just go ahead and make it look slightly bigger. And then on this one here, I'm actually going to keep blank, but I want to highlight these so that the user knows these are the sections in which they can manipulate and work with. So I'm just going to add this yellow looking color. Okay, cool. So in order to give it something to look at, we want to actually go back to our data. And again, we can use our unique equals unique function formula, or we can just go in and copy and paste inside of our sheet. Control V, and then I want to go over to data and remove my duplicates. Press OK, and there we go. We've got all of our unique ones, and I want to do that again with salesperson, and it'll make sense in a moment. Copy, paste inside of here, and remove duplicates. So now we should have 10 unique values on here and 6 unique countries in here. Okay, perfect. I want to actually create the option for my user to drop down and actually pick a country. So the way I can do that is highlight my geography countries and go over to your data tab, and you can see there's something here called data validation. I'm going to click data validation, and you can see it's giving me the option of what do you want to validate inside of your data. So I'm going to create list. And there's so many you can choose from, text length, or you can make your own custom one. We're going to make a list, and the source is the source that we just highlighted here. That's the source. And then you can press enter, or you can press this icon here and press OK. Okay, so you can see I made a little mistake. I made the drop down inside of my actual data here. So what I can do is just press inside of my column, quickly again, just add my list, and then add my source and press enter. And there we go. We've got our drop down of all of our countries. Okay, so the other section I want to add is for my user to be able to see the number of transactions. And I want this to automatically change every time they change the country. So I need to create this in a way that makes it dynamic. So I want to be able to select my country by picking on it, but I also want the number of transactions to change as soon as I change that as well. And the way I'm going to do that is just create a formula called a count ifs formula. And this formula essentially just tells me if I have this criteria, I want you to bring back this range, or I want you to bring back this function essentially, if it matches. And the way you do that is you reference your data table. That's our main data table. And we want to reference our column called geography. And then we just want to tell it to reference E4. Guys, always remember to add a comma and then reference E4, which is every time that changes, I want you to now also change the thing that comes with it. and then I want to go ahead and close my circle bracket and press enter. So at the minute, it hasn't actually chosen anything, but if I press Canada, I get my automatic number of transactions with that. Okay, now I want to go into a little more level of detail, and I want to give my user the opportunity to see the total and the average as well. And then on this section here, we're going to have cost, profit, quantity, and also sales. Okay. Again, I'm just going to do a little bit more formatting so that it looks like it's a dashboard table. I'm going to add in some of this and make everything bold so that they can see it quite easily. And then this totals is essentially going to use the formula that we looked at last time, which is the sum ifs formula. I want you guys to kind of use your memory on how we're going to lay it out, but essentially the same idea applies. We're going to reference our data table. We're going to look at geography. And then we're going to look at amount first, which is our total. And then we're going to look at our geography column. Then go ahead and close that bracket. And then we want to do a little bit of something a little bit different, which is $, and then we want to write in the 4. And then close off your circle bracket. And you can see that this is actually an absolute reference, which tells me I want to lock this cell and not move it when I move my data down as well. So this just locks my cell, and every time it will be looking at what geography is in here, what country is in here, and it will reference that. If I didn't have that, it will actually keep going down as my values go down as well. Okay. Now we're going to look at average, and the average has, like we looked at last time, the equals average, but we also want it to be dynamic. So we're going to use the average ifs formula. Again, we're just going to reference our data. We're going to look at amount. Oh, open a bracket. Amount. Close the square bracket, and then add in our geography column. This time, again, I just want to close bracket and also absolute reference my E column, my E4 column. So it is $4, and then close that off and press enter. And you can see we've actually created our very own dynamic total and average. For cost, we're going to go ahead and just copy down our formulas. And you can see it's automatically done the same thing because it is the same formula copied all the way down. But for this one, I actually just want to reference cost. And I just want to press enter. And now we have our cost. Don't worry about this green arrow. Sometimes it does that, sometimes it doesn't. Then for profit, because I haven't actually got that in my raw data, I want to go ahead and create my profit. And like when we looked at inside of our DAX formula or our measure that we did here, we want to do the exact same thing. So if you go into your formula, you can see we did the sum of amount minus the sum of cost. So I can do the exact same thing here and call that total profit and then we want to do the sum of amounts. The way we're going to do our profit is how we did our DAX measure. We're just going to go ahead and minus the amount column with the cost column and press enter. And there we have our profit. Now when we go back to our chart, we can now reference our correct reference here, which is our total profit. Press enter, and there we go. Quantity is, if we look back to our raw data, and you can see I've got some conditional formatting. Don't worry if you don't have that. But for our quantity, I just want to look at units essentially. So I'm going to change that over to units. Sometimes different things are called, the same things are called different things. So my units could be called quantity, they could be called amount, but in this case, amount is our sales. So just be aware of that. And I want to go ahead and do the same thing for my cost. So I just want to go ahead and create the same thing that I've done in the rest of my data. So for this one, I just want to change it to cost. Press enter. For this one, I just want to change it to total profit. And then for this one, I just want to change it to units. And there we go. These three are actually currencies. So I'm going to go ahead and add the currency and then remove the decimal points. This one has got way too many decimal points, so I'm going to keep it like that. Okay, perfect. We're looking good. Now, I actually just want to add my salesperson in here. And I want to create the table where they can dynamically change the name of the person, the amount, and the units. So I'm going to go ahead and add these in and make that look better. I want to go and add all of my salespeople, and these are all of my unique values. And then I want to go and paste inside of here. Now it's pasted the exact same layout as my original data table. I don't actually want that, so I can go while it's selected and click on paste values, and then you've got your salespeople, but more in the format of your original table here. So this one is just going to be our data bars. And I showed you guys how to do that, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that. This is going to be our amounts, and this is going to be our units. So that is what we're looking like at the moment. The last thing I want to do is just give me a sort of visualization on whether if my value is higher or lower than a threshold. And for my case, I've just put if it's higher than 12,000, then I want it to show an X. And if it's lower than, I want it to show, so if it's higher than, then I want it to show a plus or a tick. If it's lower than, then I want you to show me an X. And the way I'm going to do that is just type in a if formula. If, and then open your circle bracket. And then I just want to tell it if this amount here is greater than 12,000, then I want you to show me a 1, which is my true value. And if it's not, then show me a false, which is a -1 in this case. And then I just want to go ahead and click that. So now it's showing me -1. So in the case that this is like 13,000, add an extra 0. You can see it will dynamically change that as well. When you guys add in the ones that we did from last lesson, you'll be able to get this to dynamically change as well. But I can display this as a icon, which is be much easier for my user to be able to have a look at it. So the way I can do that is go to conditional formatting, icon set, and I kind of like this indicator here. You can use all of these types, but I like this one, and you can see it's giving me that plus sign. I can go a step ahead and also get rid of the 1 because I don't want to confuse the user. And then I can also show icon only. That way, when I press OK, I see just the icon. And I can rearrange it and it should look like this. So you're going to have at the end of your task, you should be able to add your data bars in here. You should have all of your amounts added dynamically. So this should be the formulas that we did in our last lesson, as well as the units. And now I've shown you how to visualize that structure based on a threshold. So if my numbers are lower or bigger than a certain threshold. Okay, the last thing we're going to look at today is which products to discontinue. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to insert a pivot table. And this time I want you to add it to a data model again. Reference the data table and click OK. We want to add product, and then we also want to add the amount into values. We also want to add the units and also the total profit. And you can see we have a graph or a table that looks like this. I'm just going to go ahead and rearrange in alphabetical order. So for our sum of amount, we want to create a DAX measure. So go over to your field here, right click, add a measure. And this time we're going to call it profit percentage. Go ahead and type in your total profit. So square bracket, total profit. And this time we want to divide by the sum of amount. Should look something like that. And this time it is a number, decimal place, but no, it's actually a percentage. So we want to keep it like that. Decimal places, I want to say 1. And press OK. And then just add that in at the end as well. So now we can see all of our products based on percentage profit. I can see the ones that go from the top to the bottom. So if I just refresh as well, I can see they've got now in here. And then I can also go in and have a look at my best performing and my least performing. So the way I can do that again is just want to tidy this up, guys. So I'm just going to remove these and then keep our total profit percentage. And then if I go into my table and then go into sort my largest to smallest, I can see that these are my largest profit margins, whereas these are my worst profit margins. So this gives me an indications of which products are not performing. I actually want to look at this in a more visual way. So I'm going to do a conditional formatting at the top here, where it just shows me my top 10 items. I want to select the whole thing, so go ahead and just select it. And then you can see top 10. These are my top 10 products, and these are my bottom 10 products. I can also highlight these again and then look at them in a color scale, and you can see which are the products I need to get rid of essentially. I can add in a deeper level of understanding again by using a slicer. So last time we added a geography slicer, I can do that again. So I can look at which products to discontinue based on the country. Again, I'm just going to make my slicer look like this. And then if I look at Australia, I'll see which ones are my worst performing. Okay, so that is it for Excel. In our next lesson, we're going to be looking at how to draw insights and give your recommendations as a data analyst. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data to Decisions. In our last lesson, we saw how to create a dashboard and actually visualize our data. Today, we're going to speak about what's more important than creating pretty dashboards. It's essentially the insight extraction and recommendations we can give as a data analyst. So, the dashboard trap. Why pretty isn't enough. Like I said, creating a visually appeasing dashboard does nothing to our work and does nothing to the business as well. Dashboards just monitor status, they don't actually drive change. Dashboards just answer the questions of what happened, but we still want to ask why that happened and what now? What kind of actions can we take after this? So, really, inside of businesses and inside of your work as an analyst, success is measured by actions taken and not just the numbers we view in our charts. There is a core workflow, and I want you to jot this down and use it every time you extract and create something out of your data. The first is observation. What does the data actually tell us? What kind of story does it give? What kind of story does it tell? So these are based on factual statements, based on the actual data that we've derived, based on evidence. So for example, sales drops 10% in Q3. That is a factual statement. The second is insight. So, why does this actually matter? The business really wants to get down to the core implication and the root cause of that drop. So, the drop is concentrated in the Midwest due to a new competitor. So, now that's given us a deeper level, a new insight into why our sales dropped. And then the last thing is the action, which is probably the most pivotal when we are creating our data dashboards and actually driving insights, which is the action. What should we do now? Specific measurable recommendations. So, for example, we need to launch a targeted royalty campaign in the Midwest. When we derive action, we are actually telling the business, look, we can make and do a lot of investigative work into why our data looks like that. And we can actually recommend you places and steps in order to achieve better results. So we're actually showing that the business something they can actionably use. Drawing insights. So the what, the so what test. Okay. And essentially, this test is where you do your observation, you do your finding, and then you give your insight. But at every observation, you ask the question of so what. So every finding must pass the so what test to be an insight. Ask so what at every observation. If you can't answer it within a business implication, it's not really an insight yet. You can go the level deeper and actually make it an insight. So if you can see on my right here, the observation is the website traffic is up 20%. So what? It's just a statement. The finding is it's driven by low quality bot traffic. So what? That's also a factual statement. The insight is actually our conversion rate is artificially diluted, masking real performance. That's the insight in the action we've taken. Okay, structuring your findings. So this is what we call the pyramid scheme or the pyramid principle. And essentially, we need to cut it down into three parts. The first is to answer the first question and lead with your main recommendation or your biggest conclusion to respect essentially your audience's time, because most of the time you're going to have to present this to firstly a non-technical audience and secondly a senior management or someone who needs to take a decision quite rapidly inside of the business. Supporting arguments, group your findings so that they're logical, distinct categories that actually build your case. Think of yourself as a detective. You want to actually categorize things and build a case around the recommendation or the conclusion that you came to. Data and facts provide the raw evidence and analysis at the base of the pyramid for deep dives. So you can see my pyramid there on the right. The Minto pyramid principle essentially is where we start at the bottom. We've got all our supporting data, all of our facts, and then we build on top of that and get a bit more niche down, and we provide supporting arguments, and then right on the top of the pyramid is the answer to our question. The MESE framework, or the MESE framework, essentially this is a mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So it essentially, we're ensuring our proposed actions do not overlap or duplicate efforts. Each recommendation should actually address a distinct part of the problem. We want to provide a deeper level and a lot of layers to our problem and our solution. Collectively exhaustive just means to ensure you have covered all possible relevant solutions. Again, think of yourself as a detective, so there's no gaps that should remain in your strategic approach to the business question. So when you're presenting this to senior management and they ask a question which you don't know the answer to, that is going to reflect badly on your analysis, but also they will start judging or questioning the work that you've actually done. Storytelling with data is absolutely key and absolutely king, especially with context. Think of it kind of like a TikTok if you've ever made one. We want to start with the hook, and this is where the business problem is and what kind of business problem you're solving. And ask yourself, why should the audience care about this? What kind of hook do you want to get them hooked into? And that's the art of storytelling with data. The second is the journey. Show the evidence that led you straight to the insight, and then connect the dots between those data points. So you can see, for example, I've got a graph here that will show me the sales amount for Q3 straight away. It's not messy, it's just straight to the point. The resolution is just the end of the clear path forward, and then the recommendation is essentially the climax of your story. So it's something you recommend as a data analyst, and always ask yourself, so what, in order to get to that recommendation. Here's a little case study, turning a chart into a strategy. You can see before I just have a nice looking dashboard, kind of like the one we built, but what we actually want to get to is the point where we can turn it into a strategy for a business to use. So a standard bar chart shows a decline in customer retention. So what? The analyst simply reports the numbers without context or next steps. There's no context, it's just a pretty dashboard. Whereas the after is your strategic advisor. So they've shown us that retention is down 15% among Gen Z users due to slow mobile load times. And then you can see there, I have a recommendation, which is to prioritize a mobile optimization in the next sprint or in the next quarter. And that's directly impactful for my business and directly something they can see and start actioning immediately. Common pitfalls, especially for new analysts, is they have analysis paralysis, which means you're trying to analyze everything. You actually don't know what to focus on. You just want to ask, what is the important question here that I'm trying to answer? Overcomplicating, using really complex models or jargon, especially when presenting to a non-technical audience, when you can just when a simple average or a clear explanation would give you exactly the answer you're looking for. Confirmation bias, looking for data that supports your initial guess rather than actually letting the data lead you. So this is quite a common pitfall where if you had something going into the question you were asking and you actually thought, I know this is going to be the answer, and then you started looking for data and manipulating data in a way to show your bias, then you're going down the route of essentially forcing your bias onto the data. Just let the data lead you. The last thing is ignoring context, so presenting numbers without actually understanding the business model or how it relates to reality, operational reality. So this is the mindset and the mind frame I want you to get into. Business first, data second. Understand the model. Be a strategic partner. Focus on the why. This is all things you can bring up in your interviews, in your CVs, and not just say, well, I analyzed some data and here are the actions. Don't just be a ticket taker. Actively collaborate with stakeholders to define the right questions and find the right answers. Okay, so what we've looked at today is the path to impactful analysis. I'll also tag and add a framework for you guys to look into, but always start with a clear business question before doing any analysis, before even touching the data. Use the so what test to filter findings into actionable insights. Structure your communication using the pyramid principle. And then finally, deliver actionable MECE recommendations that drive impact.